Hey, Trail Kreitzer at goHUNT.com. Today I'm up to my local archery range. I've been doing a little practice. Hopefully, you're all staying safe and you're now starting to get a chance to get out in the field a little bit and shoot and practice. Lately I've been thinking a lot about the types of shots that I get in the field. Western big game hunting, you very rarely get a nice level shot. Most of the time you're in uneven terrain. You're either shooting uphill or downhill or maybe even across the slope. But you're really typically always in uneven terrain, and it's had me thinking about the tips that I use, some of the tricks to be more accurate to make those shots in the field. So I had three things I wanted to talk about today that I think will help you out. The first being your form. So what does your form look like when you're shooting up a steep slope or down a steep slope? So you need to maintain your form, that T, perfect T. So rather than using your arms to try to make that adjustment to aim uphill, you need your waist to be the pivot point. So if you're shooting uphill, you want to bend at the waist. Same thing if you're shooting downhill, bend at the waist, to make that compensation. I'm going to show you a couple examples of what that looks like. So let's say, for example, I'm going to make a shot up this hill. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my bow and anchor, staring straight into that hill. And then at that point, I'm going to use my waist to pivot and make that adjustment for the shot. Same thing if I'm shooting downhill. So let's say I'm going to make this shot shooting downhill. Let's say I have a buck or a bull that's bedded underneath me and I want to make that shot. What I'm going to do, and sometimes you may even have to close your eyes to get used to this, to practice it, because your tendency is to want to draw right on that target right below you. And what I would suggest is that you find that perfect form first. So draw your bow level, anchor, and pivot at the waist. So that's my first tip for you, is make sure that your form's correct. Pivot at your waist rather than using your arms to make that compensation. The next tip I would have for you is your levels. So you need to make sure that your bubble is level, both second axis and third axis. So your second axis is essentially your horizontal. Back and forth. So what you're going to want to do is, before you even make it out into the field, you want to make sure that your string is vertical and that your sight is perfectly level, so that it's sitting exactly level. Where that comes into play is, let's say you're making a shot on a side hill and an animal is perfectly level to you on a side hill. Your tendency is to want to cant your bow into the slope because of the terrain. So if I'm standing here, I've got a slope here that's running down. My tendency is to want to cant my bow into the slope. It just feels normal because of the slope of the terrain. What you need to do is use your bubble at that point to level your bow. You want to make sure that your bow is nice and level with your bubble level. So that's something you want to check when you're executing that shot. That's going to help you make that shot across the slope. Third axis. Third axis is your ability to move your sight housing this way. So pivot back or forth from you. You're going to set that at your house. We have some videos that we're going to link within this video. It's going to show you how to set your third axis. But where that comes into play is when you're shooting either steep uphill or downhill shots. You got to have that third axis set so that when you find your level, your arrows won't drift left or right. So if that level, your third axis, is not set perfectly, you're going to get left and right misses. So that's why it's important to have a third axis sight. There's a lot of sights on the market that don't have a third axis. I would highly suggest, if you were hunting big game in the West, you get a sight that has third axis leveling and that you can level that sight out for your third axis. That's really going to help your shots uphill and downhill. Okay, so the last tip I have for you, the thing I wanted to touch on when making uphill or downhill shots, is the range. So the true distance in yardage with a rangefinder is not the distance that you're going to aim for. There's going to be a compensation because of the angle. One of the common mistakes, actually, that I see people make is they'll say, oh yeah, I had a buck or a bull walk out on a hill slope above me. I drew my bow, I anchored in, I held a foot over his back and I missed him clean. Well, yeah, you missed him clean because that shot is actually closer than you think. People think, I don't know, because they're shooting uphill they need to hold higher. In reality, you'll actually hold less. So it's the same as shooting downhill as it is shooting uphill. You're actually going to hold less yardage than the actual true distance. We're lucky that now we have rangefinders that actually compensate the angle for us. For example, I've got this little Leica 1600 rangefinder. I can shoot my range. It's actually going to give me the full range, and then it's actually going to give me the compensated range that I should hold for. So that's something to be aware of. If you're shooting uphill or downhill, you have to compensate for the range. It's typically going to be quite a bit shorter, depending on how steep and how far. It could be a lot. For example, I'm shooting a shot here off the hill. It's about a 40 yard shot. I would say it's about a 40, maybe 35 degree angle. In reality, I'm going to hold maybe for 34 yards. Just use my rangefinder. So those are my 3 tips that I have for you. 1, your form, maintain that T, bend at the waist. 2, make sure that your second axis and your third axis are totally level. Watch your bubble, shoot, live by your bubble. And then 3, you got to know your range, and you got to know that the true yardage is not your yardage if you're shooting uphill and downhill. There's going to be some compensation. So those are my 3 tips: form, level, and yardage.